Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first low production value post HGC recap and analysis that I'll be doing. I'll be doing this continuously going forward. Let me remove this, not work out. For every single week, it will always be on Tuesdays, mostly because if I'm busy on the weekend and don't get a chance to catch all the games live, I do need Monday to catch up. I ended up actually watching a significant portion of Sunday yesterday. But there will always be a Reddit thread posted. We're actually going to start with the questions that were in the Reddit thread after we do a sort of a basic recap of wins and losses and who is where. So it's worth noting that HGC China started. I think a lot of people actually don't know this. HGC China has actually started. Last week was their first week, or their second week, rather. So they have played a significant number of their own games. They're kind of a week behind or a week ahead, depending on how you want to think of it. So we're not going to do... They play on Monday, Tuesday. We're not going to talk about the matches that happened last night or the matches that are going to happen tonight. We're going to talk about where they are now and where they're going to. So the 8 teams that are participating for HGC China are eStar Gaming, which is just sort of there. They've been a consistent top team for a while. The other consistent top team for HGC China, Zero Panda, disbanded. Some of their players did trickle down to other teams. There were some replacements, some roster shuffling. Super Perfect Team still there. SOA still over there, which stands for Start Over Again. They're a team that sort of couldn't quite make it, and they reformed with the conviction that they were going to do their best. Hots Lady, named after one of the female casters for HGC China. She's been in the Chinese hot scene for a long time. CE, which is Challenge Everything, X Team, KISS, and RPG. We don't know that much about KISS and RPG, keep it simple, because there were 6 teams that qualified from Gold League into HGC China automatically, and then they had an amateur tournament to determine which of the other 2 teams would get in. We didn't see those tournament. There's no replays available. There's no casts available. There's nothing. So the first time we saw Keep It Simple or RPG play as Westerners was the start of HGC China a couple weeks ago. They were not very impressive. There's a significant gap, just like in Korea, between the top Chinese teams and the lower end Chinese teams. So moving on to their standings. Currently, we do have eStar in the top 3-1. So they actually dropped looks like a Super Perfect Team. RPG is 3-0 against SOA. So, these are pretty reasonable scores, really. eStar Gaming's 3-0, which against Hots Lady you would expect with not a top 2 team. Challenge Everything 3-0 to SOA, but SOA was not a very good team. Challenge Everything has some veteran players on it. Super Perfect Team and X Team doing 3-0s on the newbies. Again, not very surprising. There is a significant experience gap. The closest matches so far, the 3-2s, were Start Over Again versus KISS. That's the 2 of the lower ranked teams, and Super Perfect Team versus Challenge Everything. Super Perfect Team barely edging out the win there. Super Perfect Team has a lot more experience playing together as a roster, and they have more tournament experience collectively. So that was most of the reason. We haven't seen too many wonky things out of China, mostly because the wonky things are getting banned. Zagara is a go-to pick for Super Perfect Team. They really do like messing about with her on even 2-lane maps because they can just out-siege so incredibly hard and carry games that way. But that strategy is actually so effective for them, and they're so practiced at it that it draws a number of respect bans, and so we haven't seen it. The first week that I cast this with Kendrick Swish on, I think it was this Game 3 Praxis Holdout, you can see that Zagara ban coming out from eStar Gaming. They know how difficult that is. We saw it a little bit at the Eastern Clash as well. We saw it this week in GFE versus Team 8. GFE stole that strategy from China. So we have a little bit more emphasis on specialists in the Chinese scene, but the ones that are really, really effective tend to get banned out. And so we see slightly different banning and then the same kind of gameplay, which is kind of interesting. Moving on to North America. So this week we had some really interesting matches, and the majority of questions that I got were about North America. So we'll jump right into this. Gale Force Esports versus Team 8. This ended up being a 3-0, and a lot of people were asking, what happened to Gale Force Esports? What happened to Team 8? Why was this series so one-sided? And it comes down to a lot of little things. I do think Gale Force Esports essentially had better drafts in the majority of their games, and obviously we talk about it on this show a lot. if you are if you're winning the draft, the game is going to be relatively easy. Puppies welcome. My bitrate is higher than it used to be, and I still don't have quality options. That might be part of the problem if your internet's slow, because I'm streaming at a full 60 FPS now. Yeah, so they won the drafts. Why did they win the drafts, though? Why did they win the drafts? That's the question. Glaurung went on a vacation, so his team had not been scrimming, had not been practicing during that time period. The week leading up to HGC, Gale Force Esports, Teammate, and Tempo Storm all scrim against each other. They're the top 3 teams in NA. They want to have the highest quality scrim practice they can get, but you don't scrim against someone that you're playing in the upcoming week. Teams just won't do that because you don't want to reveal what your strategies are, where you think the meta is. You don't want to give that information away for free, which means that Team 8 lost both their best scrim partners because they were also playing Tempo Storm. You can scroll down here. They were also playing Tempo Storm on Sunday. So Team 8 was rusty. It's a new patch. They did not have good scrim partners. And even if they'd had good scrim partners, they hadn't been scrimming because you can't scrim when your captain's on vacation and taking a break for a little bit. And that's fair, right? It's hard to play Heroes of the Storm 6 hours a day, every day, and not get bored of the game, frustrated, tired, whatever. The important thing is that you can come back and refocus. And having to go into their first week going up against the top 2 teams that are going to give them the most trouble was really bad for Team 8. They didn't seem to have a good handle on their hero pools. They didn't seem to have a good handle on where the meta is at and which heroes are really, really strong. Their map-specific drafting was fairly weak. And if you have 2 teams that are relatively even mechanically and in terms of their strategy and their understanding of the game, and they can both execute really well, and one team has a better draft and has a better understanding of where heroes are on the current patch, they're going to win. In addition to that, I talked to Fan about this a little bit. He remembers strategies. Gale Force will just pull things out in a draft that they haven't even necessarily tried because they've seen someone else do it and it's effective. And they'll be like, we can do that. We can execute. So the Zagara thing on Braxis was something they had not practiced, as far to my knowledge. They'd just seen it. And Fan was like, that's the thing that'll work. And you can actually see, we'll go to game 3 here and we'll look at the talents real quick. So Zagara actually went Infest, and if you go watch the replay, Infest got very, very little value. Infest is a pretty late game talent. It sort of also has bugs occasionally. I think they're all fixed now, but if you watch the Chinese teams do this, they go volatile acid 100% of the time, and the reason they go volatile acid is that it allows Zagara to siege from really far away. Zagara can literally kill your buildings from off screen with volatile acid, and it's difficult to deal with. So this is a comp that they saw it work. They didn't really study it. They didn't really practice it at any point. But the reason it works for Gale Force in particular is because they have a huge emphasis on macro in their shot calling in general. If you're executing macro, you can take subpar talents. You can do subpar things as long as your rotations are really strong and you're going to be good. The fact that Michael Udall is a Falstead specialist allows Gale Force Esports to constantly be practicing the macro game. So it doesn't matter if it's something they haven't practiced a lot. They can do a 2-3 split and always be, ready for that perfect fly-in. They can do that consistently because even if the heroes change, they've practiced the concept a ton, right? And if they practice, as this game was straight up cancerous. Gilly and Dread were talking about how they were watching it and they were like, "This is one of the most frustrating things to play against I've ever seen." I'm not even in the game. I'm frustrated and I'm not even in the game. This could be even worse. And if you watch the Chinese teams execute it, you'll actually see this is even worse than it seems. This is very hard to deal with. There's a reason that the Chinese solution to Super Perfect Team, who has practiced this strategy extensively, is just ban Zagara. Just don't let them have it. The solution is not to play against it. There are other solutions. We've seen a couple of them in pro play, but they're harder to execute and you have to practice them a lot. And practice against one niche comp is not necessarily good practice. You can't practice against everything. Sometimes you can make the choice, we're not going to practice against this, we're just going to make sure they can't have it with our bans. We're going to use our bans to limit our practice space. All right. So that's Gale Force versus Teammate. That was, I think, the most asked question overall is what happened to Teammate? Why did Gale Force and Tempo Storm do so well against them? and that's most of the reason. Really, Team 8 was just not performing at their usual level. I think the series could have been closer, a lot closer, if Team 8 had a better understanding of where the current meta is, but they don't. And you can see there was a little bit of a reaction here. When they went up against Tempo Storm, we see a lot of Zeratul. We see Glaurung starting to sort of pick that comfort pick, the thing he's best at to carry with. But Tempo Storm really knows how to deal with Zeratul in a lot of ways. The other question about these series was, do I approve of Psalm's build on Valeera? And the answer is no. So you get a statistics. You can see Psalm's build for Valeera is the Wound Poison. Everything else about this build is fine. I think it's sort of a toss-up between Thistle Tea and Exposed Armor at 16. But Wound Poison, it works against Dahaka for Essence. It's going to hurt Adaptation. It's going to hurt Stone Form. It's going to hurt Healing Static. It's going to hurt Mending Strikes. So no matter what target you're focusing, since literally everyone in their team except for Tychus has self-healing, it's going to get value regardless of who your focus target is. But at the same time, you're giving up that vulnerability, right, with the free combo point from Initiative and the vulnerability from Exposed Armor, that synergy. So like I feel like they were trying to go for bursting people out, but he didn't take the burst build. It was sort of a hybrid. It's kind of an interesting decision. It is a really, really, really low cooldown, so that it has that going for it. And if they really wanted to focus down to Dahaka or Murden, which is something they did in a couple of the cases, they actually did focus the tanks and burst them out successfully. And Wound Poison was certainly a contributing factor to that in the later stages of the game because of the Stone Form, because of the adaptation. Psalm has been spamming Valeera a ton. Every time he gets a chance to play it in Cell, he plays it. He's just been practicing that hero nonstop. So if Psalm, with that experience, was like, I think Wound Poison is the better choice here, he's probably right. But at the same time, I'm not sure that it actually got the value. I did go back and look at the replay, and it didn't make a significant difference in more than like one or two engagements. But it did make a significant difference in those engagements. He actually managed to, for instance, get a significant kill on Dahaka at one point. So it's like, if it makes a difference in one or two picks, especially if they're late game picks, then it's a good talent to pick. But I think the Initiative would have been more consistently valuable. On the other hand, Psalm's really good at Valeera, and I'm probably not going to argue with him. It does really well versus like sustained burst healing. Or not just, but burst healing. But there wasn't not much burst healing except for Dahaka. And I guess Dahaka is the solo laner, so that's another argument for that talent. Because if you're trying to kill the split pushing Dahaka, right, and you're stealthy, killing the split pusher is often something your team wants to do, especially since it's their global and you don't have a global. It really helps with making sure Dahaka can't survive the gank attempts, which just matters. That talent alone is not effective versus Lucio, which was the majority of the question. Is that talent going to be effective versus just Lucio? And the answer is no. But literally everyone but Tychus on their team had self-healing. So there's a lot of healing to go through. And in that sense, it was pretty good. Second question about that matchup was Tempo Storm versus Team 8. Arthas picked block against the Tychus and not the reduced armor. We can actually... So Tempo Storm versus Team 8 in the matchup where Arthas picked block. Did this actually happen? I don't even see Arthas on Tempo Storm. Am I blind? I don't think you meant Tempo Storm versus Team 8. Oh, there it is. Arthas. I'm just crazy. Okay. Versus Tychus. So that was also game 3, Towers of Doom. I'm just crazy, guys. So that is indeed Rhyme picked up. And the thing here is that Rhyme gives you the most personal survivability. It just matters quite a bit. It's not good against Tychus. It's not good against Lucio. Those are both true statements. He didn't take the Shattered Armor. Alex the Progi has gone back and forth on this, and I think it's a tough thing to distinguish, honestly, because Frost Presence is so good. The unlocked rewards are so strong. But Arthas is a really early game hero, and Rhyme is by far the best early game talent at that tier. If you can make it through to the very, very late game by getting a tempo advantage in the early game, it doesn't matter what talent. It doesn't matter, having these talents. Shattered Armor is definitely something you always take when you take Frost Presence. If you take Frost Presence at 1, you take Shattered Armor at 13 100% of the time. You don't even think about it. You click the button. That's your talent. But I think the big thing here was Zeratul. In straight-up team fights, Lucio and Tychus are going to melt through Rhyme, but in ganking attempts, and Arthas was really far forward a lot of the time, which is an important consideration. Arthas doesn't have a jump, right? He doesn't have a disengage. If you're running Arthas as a tank, but you still need to control vision for your team. By the way, this combination of Abathur Arthas is really clever because it puts you in a situation where Abathur can use mines to help you control vision, and then Arthas does not need to be as overextended to make sure he's controlling it and run the risk of just dying out of nowhere. So yeah, Rhyme is primarily for the laning phase of the game when you're not necessarily team fighting, and then their team fight is double Greymane, right? So Arthas isn't going to be getting focused, and if they're focusing the Arthas in straight up team fights when he has Icebound Fortitude, he has ghouls. He has a 20, Legion of Northrend, more than doubling the healing from the ghouls. You're not going to be able to kill him. They don't have that level of damage, except for the Tychus. And Tychus, as the only hero who doesn't have self-healing, was often the focus target of the double Greymane. So it's a laning talent, and you will see this. And we're actually going to talk about this too for a different game. Sometimes pro players will take talents purely for the laning phase of the game to put themselves in a situation where they make sure they get to 10 even or ahead, and then they tempo out the game, right? Because they're ahead, they can do more stuff on the map. They can turn that small lead into a bigger lead. And that only happens if you have a really good laning phase. So here's the other question. We saw Death Coil talents taken by Caterpillar. Couple things to note. Caterpillar was the solo laner. He was up against a Falstad. Falstad is not a good solo laner, usually. Falstad can be okay against certain melee heroes because he can poke them. And he can't get poked back like Sonya. If Sonya misses her spear, there's nothing she can do to a Falstad. Falstad will just poke her down. He can at minimum tie the lane. If you have a Dahaka, you can keep poking him. You can't actually force Dahaka back off the point until 7 with Boomerang. You need that burst. But you pick up Hammer Gains at 4, you pick up Boomerang at 7, you can put yourself in a position where you can slowly edge the lane out, and when the matchup goes on for an extended period of time, like it does on Dragonshire, that matters. But Arthas gets poke with Q build. He gets sustain. Suddenly, the power spike at 7 of Boomerang, where Falstad's normally good against melee heroes, doesn't happen. And Arthas will win that lane. But he won't win it without Q build. He needs Q build to win the lane, right? So this is actually really, really important. The reduced cooldown gives him more self-sustain, although it does impact his mana a little bit. But Rhyme helps with the self-sustain as well. Again, we saw that. And then Immortal Coil helps with the self-sustain. Icebound Fortitude is strictly better in teamfights. It is 100% better in teamfights all day, every day. If you think you're going to be on a map where you're fighting in the late game as a team, and that's going to be your win condition as a comp, you go Icebound Fortitude 100% of the time. The reason we see Icebound Fortitude picked by almost every EU pro, for instance, is because they know they have a very macro-focused meta. They know they're always going to get to the late game. They know that's going to happen. Tempo Storm is a macro team in a region that does not respect macro. So they often get macro advantages just by playing the laning phase better, and they're just ahead the entire rest of the game. One of the reasons that they get punished so hard when they go to international events is because in the international scene, all the top teams are macro teams. All the top teams play the way Tempo Storm does, but they've had more practice at it. And they've had practice against people who also are macro teams, whereas Tempo Storm doesn't really often get a chance to practice against other macro teams. It's a huge, huge problem for them. But in this case, Q-Build allowed Caterpillar to dominate this Falstad lane. It forced Glaurung to constantly rotate up there looking for a pick, which he always failed to get. And they just eventually won the game based purely off that. They got a keep at like the 20 to 19 mark. And Teammate had a ridiculous team fight that almost put them back in the game. They almost won it off the back of that. But in the end, Tempo Storm managed to close it out. So yeah, that was Q-Build. You will almost never see this in other regions because other regions have macro teams who are up against other macro teams, and they know they're going to need to eventually win a fight. But Tempo Storm, since day one as a team, has been in a position where they often win games just off the back of macro. Envy Black, as a team fight team, how do they punish macro teams so much? There's a funny story about Envy Black when it comes to macro. They were playing against TNL. in spring league in Korea, they drafted Falstad. This is pre-rework Falstad. This is not like massive, yay, new Falstad. This was old Falstad that everyone thought was bad. NBA Black won every single team fight that game on Cursed Hollow 4v5 because all they did with Falstad was have him take bribe. He bribed merc camps and pushed lanes. That's all he did. And TNL, of course, had Noblesse as a captain. Noblesse is one of the best macro shot callers in the world. That was their solution. That's literally what they needed to do in order to beat TNL at the time. They just drafted Falstad with bribe, and he cleared waves. That's all he did. NBA Black, it succeeds against macro teams as a team fighting team because their team fight is so good that they can fight down a talent tier and win. And we've seen this time and time again. We saw it against even Tempest on Infernal Shrines at I think Summer Worlds. They had a team fight 15-16. They just invaded the shrine, and Tempest A wasn't expecting it. They expected NBA Black to play normal, but NBA Black was like, we can win this, and they ended up getting a full 5-man wipe. They aced Tempest. I'm pretty sure it was Tempest. 15-16. If you're such a good team fighting team that you can fight down a talent tier and trade up and win consistently, then it doesn't matter if you are worse at macro because you're just going to be able to snowball people in team fights. And that's actually a problem that a lot of teams have. One of the things that King Caffeine said one time was that if we go to international events, we'll be fine because they're not ready for our level of aggression. And what he's talking about is the fact that when they play against macro teams who are good at macro but bad at team fighting, they'll just roll over them. Because if you're mechanically good in the clutch and team fights and you can just consistently get kills, you're going to stay even with a macro team. And if you're staying even with a macro team, then eventually you're going to get to the late game where death timer is really long. You win one team fight and just doop, the team falls over, you go in the game. And game's over. If you're up against a macro team who has enough team fighting mechanic to not die to your early game advantage, you're going to end up multiple levels behind and never be able to catch up. And that's what we've seen in international events. When we've seen that aggression at literally every event except BlizzCon where Cloud9 won. Every international event we've seen from NA teams, we've seen them try to be aggressive, get 1 or 2 picks but miss soak as a result, end up behind in levels and just get steamrolled. That's what we see when we see NA in other regions. Which is why, again, I'm excited about the fact that Gale Force did this macro strategy on Braxis. Like they're paying attention to macro. Our top teams in NA are starting to macro in the same style and at the same level that we're seeing from Chinese teams, we're seeing from EU teams, we're seeing from Korea teams. If this level of increase in skill, especially from our top 3 teams, continues, the next international event we could reasonably, not have NA just get knocked out and not win anything except against each other and the lesser regions. I would not be surprised if come the mid-season brawl we had an NA team in the top 4. I'm not saying it's likely, I'm just saying I wouldn't be surprised. Moving down a little bit, next question on the Reddit thread was there. What happened to Know Tomorrow that Niventic was able to go against B-Step? What happened to Know Tomorrow that they could beat Niventic and B-Step could not? And the answer to that is really simple. B-Step doesn't practice. I don't know how many people are aware of this, but B-Step as a team rarely scrims. They basically never practice. A lot of them don't even practice on their own. They don't play Hero League. I know for a fact, I won't say who, but some of them literally didn't play until the day they showed up to HGC. We saw what happened to Team 8, which is a really, really good team that does practice. When they didn't practice for a couple of weeks, they slid way back. B-Step doesn't practice at all, basically. So B-Step played their game. They did what they could. And Niventic beat. I'm going to call my ISP about that because it happens at the same time every day. Sorry about that, guys. I don't know what's happening with my ISP. It's like happened every day. This every time I've been streaming at this time of day, that's happened, and I don't know why. I apologize for that. But yeah, B-Step doesn't really practice, and Niantic does practice. So we're in a situation where a team that practiced was up against a team that didn't practice. Really not much else to it. And the question, like, Niantic receives that. Then what happened versus No Tomorrow? Why could No Tomorrow beat Niantic? Do you know this for a fact? I know this for a fact. Multiple people know this for a fact. Some of them talk about it on stream, how they don't practice, if you watch their streams. So it's not like a big secret in the community. Why don't they practice? I don't know. That's a really good question. Some teams want to be the best in the world. Some teams are comfortable being in the middle of the pack. I think from B-Step's perspective, as long as they can be in the middle, at least some of them are okay with that. And you need everyone on a team to have the same goal. Like, the person who wants to put in the least effort is the person that you're restricted by, right? So if there's one person on the team, or two people on the team, or three people on the team who are like, we don't really want to practice, we're happy with where we are in the standings, then if there's like two or three people on the team who really want to try hard, they can't. You can't have a scrim with only two of your members, right? So, I mean, that's the reason Chew8 left Team 8, right? He didn't want to commit time to practicing because he makes so much more from streaming. And he understood that his team really wanted to practice. His team really wanted to try and be the best. And he was like, I can't do that. So Chew8 left. And it's fine. But it's just the way it is. Second part of that question was Niantic versus No Tomorrow. How come No Tomorrow beat Niantic? No Tomorrow practices. No Tomorrow has been working really hard. They've done multiple interviews about it, about how they aren't happy with being at the bottom of the standings. They don't want to be thought of as the worst team in North America. They don't want to go to the Crucible, right? And No Tomorrow practices. And No Tomorrow has been studying the top teams when they're practicing. They're starting to do macro. They're starting to shot call macro well. And Niantic is still being very, very aggressive. Niantic actually is really clever in some things. We saw a really cool arrangement where Leoric loses the lane to Arthas in the solo lane. So No Tomorrow put Tychus down there instead, but they had Leoric assisting, essentially, for a little bit. Until level 4, when Tychus got Bigger They Are, and Bigger They Are out damages Drain Hope, so Tychus can sort of start to bully Leoric in the lane. Those little things that Niantic do show a really clean understanding of the game, but they don't play together as a team. So there's one person who on Team Niantic who has a really clear idea of how the game works. He's has a clear understanding of matchups, really studies the game a lot. Either that, or he just happens to have all this knowledge. Like he's just good enough at the game that he can look at the talents and be like, I know exactly what's going to happen with this matchup. And this matchup, I'm going to have good laning. And then they lose in late game team fights if they're up against teams that are equally mechanically skilled as them, because those teams really try hard to synergize together and play together as a team. And Niantic is a bunch of really talented individuals who don't play together well. There's a lot of reasons for that. There's public reasons for that people have talked about a ton. There's probably some other reasons that we're not aware of, but you can look at them. You can look at their team fight, and it doesn't happen. Is it Zuna? I actually talked to Zuna for Gear Gaming not too long ago. Zuna has a really clear understanding of the game, its strengths and weaknesses as a game. Zuna is a really smart guy when it comes to Heroes of the Storm. And I would bet that the person I'm talking about who has that knowledge of the game that makes their laning phases so clean is Zuna. But then they have the super hyper aggression, and it's not there. Did B-Step used to practice? Everyone was practicing. Everyone was scrimming for qualifiers. Everyone I knew was scrimming constantly for qualifiers. So B-Step used to practice, yes. They just don't now. Dude, Zuna's mechanics are really good. His understanding of the game is really high. You cannot say anything bad about Zuna's mechanics or his game like knowledge, his game theory crafting. He's a really smart guy. He's just can't seem to get his team to all be on the same page at the same time, and I think that it's part of that's that he just doesn't respect Heroes of the Storm as a game in some ways. That it is so team focused. He would prefer if it was more individual mechanically focused so that he could really shine as a player doing the things that he likes doing. But it is so incredibly team focused, and that is Niantic's biggest weakness. And that weakness puts him constantly in a position where he tries to make plays that his team cannot follow up on. And that comes down to communication, which is obviously something that if you're not playing together as a team, communication is not going to be one of your strong points. There's lots and lots and lots of things that we could talk about there. Do I find the lack of... so the next questions are all EU questions, I think. Oh, no, there's one more... there's one more NA question, which is Tempo Storm versus Teammate on Braxis Brightwing comp. Like, what? That is the exact question. So that is this game, right? Yeah, Brightwing comp. If you look at the draft order, Teammate has 2 globals, and Tempo Storm has 0, except for the fact they are going to go stage dive. But in the early game, they have 0 globals. There's a basic rule here, which is that you don't want the difference in certain resources to be bigger than 1. So if the enemy team has 3 wave clear heroes, you need 2. If the enemy team has 2 globals, you need at least 1. If the enemy team has 1 global and you have 0, or they have 2 and you have 1, it's not really great. They actually furthered this. They actually picked up Zeratul as well, which is not a popular pick on Braxis Holdout. In fact, it's one of his lowest win rate maps. But Zeratul acts as a pseudo-global because you don't necessarily always know where he is. And his ability to hunt down Falstad in particular is god tier. There is no better counter to Falstad than a good Zeratul. So Tempo Storm put themselves in a situation where they beat Teammate on the rotation because their globals are specifically scary to Teammate's globals. And they don't care about Dahaka. Dahaka can do whatever he wants. Dahaka can clear a wave, but he can't really siege. So you can slow rotate to deal with the Dahaka, and you can fast rotate to kill the Falstad and just catch him on the rotation. You're going to be in good shape. Tempo Storm, again, is a macro team. Their drafts are macro focused. They picked the best hero in terms of the macro and the pressure. Because if you're picking into globals, right, your macro is... You're hindering the enemy team's macro just by having Zeratul, just by having Brightwing, because you can't have the free pushing Falstad if there's a Zeratul on the map. You can't have these things. And so by limiting their macro and increasing your own potential macro, you set up a situation where you're going to be incrementally ahead, right? Yes. Yes, it is. This question from Chad is, if he's so mechanically skilled and has such a good understanding of the game, is it just a lack of team coordination that makes him look like he's making terrible decisions? And the answer is yes. Actually, if you go watch Rich play on PTR sometimes, where the matchmaking is all wonky and he's just solo queuing, or watch Chew8 in his Bronze 5 to GM challenge playing heroes, or if you watched Nostromia at all, you'll notice that when they first start playing with lower level players, lower level teams, they'll do things that are perfectly reasonable and they'll die because their team didn't follow up. And a team that was higher level would have followed up. It was just obvious that what the team should be doing. And they have to make adjustments. Zuna is playing at a level that's above everyone on his team, basically. And he's not providing the mentoring, I think, that would allow them to catch up. So sometimes it looks like he's making this crazy, stupid thing, and it doesn't work. But if his team were better, those plays would look ridiculous. Sometimes they don't work at all. Like the famous example is the Leyline Seal he missed on Infernal Shrines against Team 8. If that Leyline Seal had hit, that would have been a team wipe. But Team 8 positioned in such a way that it couldn't hit. And the reason they did that was because Glaurung has so much experience playing Medivh that he knew what Zuna was looking for and told his team to spread. Right? They made that call like instantly. So if you get outplayed but you're making plays, it's a complicated question. Tempo Storm won that draft, or would it have been a closer fight if the other way if T had actually had a chance to scrim practice? They have Zarya on Braxis, so they automatically won the draft. Yep. In other words, Zuna is truly an MMR. I have no comment. I have no comment at all. It looks like the next questions are all EU related, though. So we can move on to EU, which was a battle to see if Team Expert could get out of 4th place. That's what I'm choosing to think of it as. Battle to see if they could get out of 4th place, and the answer was unfortunately no, but man, did they give us some interesting games as a result. The main question here about EU meta. Why is Zarya so freaking strong on Braxis? That's actually really... Okay, I've talked about this a lot, but the reason Zarya is so strong on Braxis is because, A, Zarya is the strongest early game hero in the entire game. Bar none. Zarya is the strongest early game hero in the entire game. Braxis is all about the early game. Every 2-lane map, in fact, is all about the early game. There's some strategic exceptions on BOA that are too complicated to go into. Most 2-lane maps are all about the early game. She has incredible siege damage because of shields and having really high energy. She has really good sustain, essentially, because if you draft a sustain healer to sustain your forming, which you need to do, suddenly shields deal with burst. And so you have burst and you have sustain, you're good. Zarya can even solo tank, quote-unquote, on Braxis, because the tanks usually ward rotations. On a 4-1, there's no rotations. You just keep pushing the lane, right? Until you win the game. You're in the lane 90% of the time. Point control is really strong. If Zarya is at full energy and you step up to her, she wins that damage trade. 100% of the time, she wins that damage trade. So if you're standing on the point trying to contest it, and Zarya is standing there and you come up to her, you're dead or you're off the point. Take your pick. You're not winning. You're not winning that damage trade. You don't win. So Zarya is just insane. Zarya makes any 4-man on Braxis the strongest possible 4-man. At least until like level 7 or 8. But if you're not ahead by level 7 or 8 and you have a Zarya, then you're worse than the enemy team. Do you think Naventic really had big ping problems while playing against them tomorrow, or did they just play bad? I went over that already. You can watch the VOD, but basically, No Tomorrow's been practicing their macro, and Naventic is still an aggressive team that doesn't respect macro. Long story short. They could have had ping problems. Ping is going to be a problem. For the record, the way it works in HGC, I don't know how people are aware of this, the team that picks map gets to host the server. So if you pick map, then you're going to be on your home server, whichever server gives you the best ping. The only reason I know that is because that's the way we did it for Gear Gaming's The Maelstrom when we invited the HGC teams to play in like the Pro-Am side of things, and that's how they did it. And I was like, is that the way it works in HGC? And they were like, yep. So if they had ping problems, it wasn't because they couldn't have had it every game, because they would have had at least some games where they were on their preferred server, right? Okay, so EU. So online events, you get 2 benefits to map pick, essentially, yeah. Your map and better ping. I mean, it might not be better ping. What if both teams are all on the West Coast, or both teams are all on the East Coast? Is that early game strength the reason Korea loves Zarya? Yes. Korea loves Zarya for 2 reasons. One, early game strength. They really know how to abuse it correctly because if they're winning, they'll siege. A lot of teams, if they're winning, they won't siege. And the second reason is that Korea loves killing backliners. They will go way out of position, trusting their mechanical ability to dodge everything to get onto a backliner and murder them. Zarya shields are really good at denying that, as are Tassadar shields. But Zarya also puts you in a situation where if you dive the backline and miss, Feel the Heat will melt you. You're dead. Right? So Tassadar, he can shield you, but he can't kill you as punishment for diving onto his team. Zarya can shield the carry and then kill you as punishment for diving onto her backline. That's her backline. You're not allowed anywhere near it. Also, she has Peel in the form of Expulsion Zone, which matters quite a lot in the late game. All right. Questions from Reddit. Double support comps. We're talking about this. Why is double support so good? Well, Lucio has infinite sustain, essentially mana free, because even though Amped Up cast mana, you're not spamming it every 15 seconds. And Ariel has the best burst healing, essentially, of any support, and she has it on a 2-second cooldown. Post 7, at least. So if you have those two together, if Lucio can sustain your carry and give them movement speed and keep them safe so that they can generate hope for Ariel, then Ariel will deal with everything else. In Soviet Russia, Kere kills you. All right, so yeah, that's the entirety of the double support. Sound Barrier and Aegis both act as saves that they don't have cleanse, but also in addition to all of those factors, armor makes healing better. And so all these recent changes where tanks have been getting baseline armor has pushed us into a meta where healing is just really, really efficient. And you got to remember that this meta is not going to last very long, because as soon as Blizzard is done reworking all the warriors so that they're happy with their armor levels, the plan is to drop the average output of every single support in terms of healing. They stated that in the design goals. They were like, we know supports are too strong in terms of healing, but they need to be able to heal tanks. And their current numbers are fine for tanks, but too high for everyone else. So we're going to give tanks armor instead, and then we're going to drop the healing of every single support. So for a little while, we're going to be in a double support meta because it makes sense in terms of... It's kind of clunky, but you can imagine damage versus sustain as a single equation, right? Like if you have imagine both teams have like a health bar, right? And you can drop the health bar and you can make the health bar go up. You have tools to do both. So if you can do more healing than the enemy team can do more damage, you never die. Eventually you'll win the game. They mentioned the Q&A. It's not necessarily the case. I didn't see that. If that's true, then I'd be very surprised. Because currently armor is busted. It's making some warriors so incredibly strong in terms of the efficiency and the amount of damage that they can deal with. I wouldn't be surprised if they drop that plan. Blizzard has obviously come up with and dropped a lot of plans over the years, up to and including like entire games. If anyone remembers the Nova StarCraft spinoff that was supposed to happen and never did. But I expect a rebalancing of supports to happen regardless after they're happy with where the tanks are, because it seems like they're working through trying to update everyone to the new design of the game. And if they decide to change that design partway through the process, I wouldn't be surprised. But we're going to see something happen. Yeah, Blizzard's not afraid to admit when they make a mistake. Artifacts were not a good idea. They dump them. Like if it turns out for some reason from internal testing the support idea was bad, they'll drop it. But I'd be curious to see exactly what they said. If anyone has a link, did not see that. EU Solo Warrior Varian won only one game over the weekend. Judging by this, why do teams try to still solo tank Varian? Can actually let's go to Heroes and Varian and limit to Europe, since this is a Europe-centric question. So it looks like he lost there. So Team Expert won with him one time. I'm curious to see what this build is from Taunt, Mortal Coil. Again, Mortal Coil? Or not Mortal Coil, but Mortal Strike against Lucio. That's such an odd pickup. I mean, granted, the uptime on Mortal Strike with Overpower is pretty high. But what burst healing are they negating? This is really just for the Dahaka. Like, this is most effective against the Dahaka. And I guess the Arthas with Army of the Dead, so that's what they're trying to negate. They're really trying to make sure they can kill the front line. That seems to be the new trend, or the new place for Varian. And it seems to be the new thing for the healing reduction talents. They sort of negate these intense survivability from the tanks that, aren't necessarily tanks. They're sort of bruisers, but they have a lot of self-sustain, and you can negate that a lot. It's worth noting, you can see from the talents, this game was already over. Mortal Strike was probably snap picked just to kill the Dahaka. But yeah, I don't know why you would pick Varian. On Braxis of all maps, too. Because we were just talking about it, the early game matters so much. They really have Sonya and Greymane to carry the early game quite a bit, though. So that's a huge factor. But, I mean, this is a problem with Braxis holdout. Bakery made a mistake on the map during this game, and Team Expert just dominated from that point onward. The problem with Braxis is that if you can lose in the draft, and if you make a single early game mistake, the game's frequently over. You can literally make a mistake at like the 2-minute mark that will cause an 11-minute, 30-second end, and the game's over. One mistake is all it takes, especially if it's in your soloing. Which is why we started to see 2-3 splits on this map from a lot of pro teams, and even 3-1 splits with a roam. Tempostorm kind of did a 2-2 with a global that could be wherever it needed to be, right? We're starting to see different laning arrangements so that all your eggs are not on one basket, even though it means your other basket may be on fire because the other team's still doing a 4-1, then you're going to have a rough time. So Varian only won one game. I mean, Taunt is really strong. Shield Wall is really strong. Shield Wall giving you protected status is kind of like Zarya's shield, right? He has that same kind of sustain. You can stand in the front and absorb a lot of poke. So there's value for that on Braxis. And obviously in the late game, or I should say the mid to late game, Varian is one of the strongest heroes in the entire game. It's just a question of can you macro well enough to not fall behind and get to 10 even. Yeah, it looks like his win-loss record is not fantastic for this patch. Can I? Just the previous patch. That's 50-50. That's actually not so bad. Yeah, Varian's still just really strong at lockdown. Lockdown's still really good if you have a single vulnerable target. Like in this matchup, Tricked Esport versus Team Liquid, this was I think a Zeratul thing. They wanted to make sure that as soon as Zeratul came out of stealth, they had some way of dealing with him. And Charge Taunt still, disables Zeratul. You can also use it on Zeratul if you're not in the VP to make sure that Zeratul can't cancel the VP at the right time, which means that if you can't cancel, you can control when the follow-up happens, which makes it easier to dodge things and less likely that you can mess about. We've even seen Medivh Zeratul combos, right, where Zeratul will put the VP down and then the Medivh will leyline seal the Zeratul so he can't cancel. Really, like, that's a narrow window. That's a narrow window to outplay, but we've seen it multiple times now in pro play. It's something that teams are aware of. If a VP goes down, the person you need to focus is the Zeratul so that you can mess up the follow-up. I mean, most of them, actually, most of his wins, he was another warrior. That's fair. Like here, he has Arthas, which I would consider a bruiser. Just a really, really overtuned bruiser. Here he loses. He doesn't have another warrior. Here he wins, has another warrior. Here he loses, has another warrior, but it's Zarya, who doesn't really patch any of his weaknesses. Varian's biggest weakness as a tank is peel. He doesn't have peel, really, of any kind. Taunt doesn't really count because you're saving it for the focus target. Like it's your lockdown mechanic. So anytime he has an Arthas and he can peel, and the Arthas can focus on peeling, he seems to do a lot better. So, yeah, I think that teams are just like, Varian's a warrior. He's a tank. We can pick him as a tank. You gotta respect the fact that some warriors have really strong weaknesses. To this day, there's only 3 complete tanks in my opinion. They're Nubarak, ETC, and Muradin. Everyone else has a weakness that needs to be drafted around. If you draft a Nubarak, Muradin, or ETC, they can always like tank. Whether or not they're good enough by themselves for other categories is a different question, especially with the ETC nerfs, but they can do the tanking job for the most part, but other warriors can't. You have to draft around that. And, we see success when it's drafted around for the most part and failure when it's not. It seems pretty straightforward. Dig versus Expert game 1 on Tomb. Thrall Stitches comp. I don't understand how Thrall fits in here. Thrall wins the lane. Johanna's not a good tank. Johanna has no initiation until 10, and then it's on a 60-second cooldown. right? Johanna has no mobility. Iron Skin kind of counts because she can't you can't deny her mobility with stun chains. You can still body block her, but the thing she really really lacks is initiation. If you go watch Team 8 versus Tempo Storm Dragonshire, where Johanna was tanking, they had a gank attempt in the top lane where Johanna tried to. I think that was the game where Johanna tried to get a kill. And it was pre-10. It failed. It had been literally any other warrior, the gank attempt would have succeeded. Dread actually talked about it during the cast. If you are Johanna, you can initiate team fights for your team until you're 10 plus, and only with your heroic. We have seen Noblesse and SCSC with crazy good synergy, where on maps with tight chokes, they'll do Condemn into Rain of Vengeance. That is beautiful. When you see Noblesse SCSC do Condemn into like a perfect Rain of Vengeance, like everyone who got hit by the Condemn gets hit by the Rain of Vengeance. It's gorgeous. But that's a specific synergy that those two have, and they only try it on maps with narrow chokes where they can reliably get the Condemn value. Condemn is extremely dependable, though. Most warrior initiate in the game. Dahak is not a tank. Yeah, if a bruiser doesn't have an engage, that's okay. If a tank doesn't have an engage, they're not a tank. And Johanna has an engage, but it's movement speed at 7 on Condemn, and then her heroics, and that's the best it is. And those aren't great. Jojo damage build? That was not a damage build. Okay, we're gonna talk about this. This is actually super fun to watch, because everyone thinks Roar is a bad talent. And Rory is not a good talent, let me tell you. But it does have some situational uses, and this is one of them. How do you lose the early game as an Abathur comp? How do you lose the early game as an Abathur comp? You get out macroed. Your lanes get pushed in. You can't clear the waves fast enough. So picking up Johanna with an Abathur is always really good in general because it gives you wave clear in the tank slot. But they also picked up Zul'jin, who doesn't really have wave clear. They picked up Lucio, who doesn't really have wave clear. They picked up Dahaka. Totally fine. Dahaka has wave clear, but he's going to be in the solo lane, right? Roar, at level 4, is the best wave clear talent at that tier. You'd think it was Eternal Retaliation, but if you're just trying to clear a wave and rotate, so you want to snap clear the wave, Roar is actually better, especially if you get hatted. If you Condemn, punish, Abathur hat with the Spike Burst, the wave is done. The wave is dead. You can just leave, which means you can... It's worse wave clear in the sense that it's not as mana efficient, and it is technically slower over like a 12-second window, but it's faster over like a 6 to 8 second window, right? And if you go watch this game, you can see JPL, all he did was clear and rotate and clear and rotate and clear and rotate. Sometimes he sat on the point, like helped his team out for a little bit. Battle momentum was also really, really helpful because the attack speed, Adrenal Overload, it actually ended up getting a little bit more value. And the only really weird thing is Blessed Hammer. Blessed Hammer is just a strange talent to take, honestly. It does contribute to more siege damage. It does contribute to more wave clear. And I think it was mostly the siege damage. I honestly think he took this for building damage. Because if you look at their comp, they don't siege buildings well. They're in a situation where they have to get a Dragon Knight in order to kill the forts. And I think when they hit 16, there was actually still... We can actually check to see if I'm crazy or not. I think when they hit 16...
On our first map to the Spider Queen.
Yeah, see, they hit 16, and Team Expert still has forts alive. Right? So, I'm not kidding. Blessed Hammer is bad because the hammer spins out in such large circles that it's not good like team fight damage. It's not even really good wave clear, but buildings are big enough that it will actually eat multiple shots from the hammer. So the hammer actually ended up doing a significant amount of siege damage to buildings. They needed ways to kill the buildings more. It also helps with Roar to notice that there are essentially 3.5 melee here. So Roar does a lot of extra damage. Punish actually has a really reasonable base damage. So if you add on to that by doing Roar, you're actually going to do a lot of spread damage across everyone on the team, which is debatably useful. But when you have all that single target from Zul'jin, like, they had no area damage of any kind, really. And so Johanna just took every area damage ability. It helped with wave clear. It helped with straining mouth, wanting to keep it hot, rolling on everyone. It helped with Zarya shields. But Punish actually does a significant amount of damage, so Roar helps with that. Yeah. That's a weird build. I'm not even going to pretend that's not a weird build, for the record. But it did what it needed to do. It did what it was designed to do really, really well. Really well. Thrall Stitches comp. So we're gonna backtrack a little bit here. Thrall Stitches comp. Team of Spider Queen game 1. Right? This is the Stitches Tyrande comp. Thrall wins the lane. It's really what it comes down to. Thrall wins the lane against Ragnaros. If you look at the draft, Rag was picked up and then Thrall was immediately locked in. They could have picked a different hero to potentially win the lane against Rag, but the difference here is that Thrall has a root, which means he's follow up to hook. You'll notice that everyone but Greymane has CC. Tron has a stun follow up. Kayle has a stun follow up. Thrall has a root follow up. He can also sunder. One of the ways that you're going to save a hooked target, especially if it's a Gul'dan, is getting in range for Sound Barrier in time. And if Thrall sunders Lucio away, that doesn't work anymore. So it's not about Thrall being great for the comp necessarily. It's he wins the solo lane, and he has CC follow up, and he can guarantee the hook target dies by making sure the enemy team can't come peel for them. It's just a really simple dynamic. It's just standard like clever team expert style drafting, focusing on the lane. One team in NU went Kerrigan on Shrines without Q build. I don't get that. I don't get that either. I think this is a mistake. I know exactly the game you're talking about. This was a bad decision. Statistics. This is the game. It is Team Dignitas versus Team Expert game 5. Kerrigan with block and Fury of the Swarm. It doesn't make sense to do this, especially on Infernal Shrines. Like, block is only really good against the Zul'jin, and you're giving up all of your on-point sustain. Like, you're giving up the reason you draft Kerrigan on Shrines, which is she races the point faster than any other hero, in exchange for what? Like, there's no benefit to that. Block is a surprisingly high win rate talent on Kerrigan, and always has been, just because armor is really, really good. But not on Shrines. I think Blade just made a mistake here. I almost wonder if it was like a misclick and he just went with it. Like he built the rest of his build. You also see he picked up Overdrive, which is like not a standard talent. If you pick up Overdrive, you're foregoing Kerrigan's survivability. One of the reasons that Kerrigan drops off in the mid to late game is her survivability relative to the damage goes way down. Her shield, the scaling of her shields just doesn't keep up. Aggressive Defense and Essence for Essence both kind of fix that problem by giving her more survivability. Overdrive kind of does that because you're increasing the damage, which increases the shields, but it's usually not enough, and it certainly wasn't enough in this case. Either this is an experiment that worked in scrims and it failed here, or it was a misclick, but that game was just very one-sided, and Blade did basically nothing. So, I mean, 18 kills to 5. If you're on the lower end of kills with the Kerrigan comp, you're doing something wrong. That game just didn't make sense. The draft made sense. The game didn't. Please discuss how HGC League format is impacting the overall skill level of the different regions. Every region's skill level is going up. Like, every skill level in every region is going up. From week to week, we saw it in Season 1, where teams were visibly improving in terms of macro and shot calling. Having a stable format where you know you have to play every week has been nothing but good for every single region. HGC Open Insights. Kira's team is definitely going to be one of the top 2 teams. I don't see anyone beating them considering the amount of practice they have and the amount of work they put in consistently. I don't know who number 2 is going to be. Currently, my favorite would be Even in Death or LFM, one of those two. But I don't know who's going to make it along with UTA. I think that's all the questions from the Reddit thread. I think I got all of them. Yes, I did. So if there's any other questions, any other follow-ups, anything you guys want more detail on regarding HGC, you can feel free to ask. No one asked anything about Korea. Do I see Kira's team winning in the Crucible? Yes. I think Kira's team could be potentially the 4th best team in NA. So I don't think winning in Crucible is actually going to be... It's going to be challenging for them because the team that they're up against is going to prepare for them specifically. And anytime a team can prepare for you specifically, it's going to be rough. But yeah, I don't see who's losing in the Crucible. I think so. I don't know if you guys check Reddit a lot, but B Smiley has been doing some really cool work on developing an elo system for HGC and making predictions, and it's really cool. I encourage you guys to check it out when you see it. But currently, I think it's like his elo system has it like a 98% chance that No Tomorrow and Naventic end up going to the Crucible. And based on what I've seen, I think No Tomorrow could avoid it. I think they could. But I don't think Naventic can. So either it could be, and BSEP can. They can drop all the way down. So, but I think the top 3 are safe. I think Superstars is actually safe because they've made some changes. So it's going to be 1 of or 2 of BSEP, Freedom, Naventic, or No Tomorrow. You don't like Smiley's predictions? That was his old system. His old chance was 50-50, but now he actually uses Elo. You should go check it out, Ghost Dunk. His methodology changed from the first time he started doing it. Who are my favorite top 2 for NA and EU? My guesses are TS. My favorite top 2 for NA is Tempo Storm and GFE because they demonstrated macro consistently, and they're starting to do that a lot. My top 2 for EU, my favorite teams, are Dignitas and Team Expert. I love Fnatic. I'm actually good friends with this couple guys in Fnatic now. I have been ever since Gold Club World Championship. I actually have a picture of Quacknix in my Twitch chat congratulating me on being such a good caster when I was casting the Gold Club World Championship. It's a special moment for me. But Team Expert, I love their drafts. I can't not be a fan of a team that has such good drafts. What changes did Superstar make? Srey is no longer shot calling, and Hosty is drafting. So I think Goku is the primary shot caller, and Hosty is their primary drafter. Pros Brawl, which rosters need to use their swap? I think all the rosters are fine. If teams actually played together as a team, they would be 100% fine. But we don't see a lot of that, unfortunately. I can do Korea generally. I actually totally forgot that I hadn't done Korea because no one asked any questions about them, so they weren't really on my mind. Which I find kind of surprising. Like, no one asked any questions about Korea. So, things to keep in mind about Korea. Every game that was played was not played between teams that were close to each other in any way, shape, or form. So it was basically the top teams against the bottom teams all weekend long. Sorry if this is too specific. Could you help me understand why playing Ducks gave up the first Shrine and Infernal Shrines in both their series? Yes, I can. I'll actually answer that question. So Korea wasn't great this week. Just because, like, I want to give you guys an L5 versus Mighty. This is probably the trolliest series I've ever seen from L5. Battlefield of Eternity. These are not like illegitimate picks. I'm not saying that. But Noblesse took Sledgehammer at 4 on Muradin. Sledgehammer at 4 on Muradin has actually always been a really high win rate talent on Battlefield of Eternity, especially when it's paired with Perfect Storm, because you get 5 bonus damage for each hero hit, and then that gets multiplied by 400% by Sledgehammer. You actually end up hitting Qs on the Immortal, like right at level 4 for almost 1,000 consistently. And 1,000 damage to an Immortal every 8 seconds is actually a significant amount of damage when you're just racing it. They are not bad talent picks, but they are not standard, and the reason they're not standard is because they're just not quite as good if you actually have to win a fight. But L5 is so far above Mighty in terms of their teamfight mechanics that they can win with suboptimal talents and just make the game go faster by taking better race talents. And that's literally what happened. If you go watch, it was incredibly one-sided. The only series that was even remotely close this week was MV Black versus Tempest. Right, this is the only series that I think is actually maybe even worth watching. You get to see another example of the Murky pickup as a counter to Dahaka in the solo lane on Dragonshire, which is something we saw at Western Clash. It is incredibly effective. It doesn't work in the early game, but it works like in the late game. And Dragonshire always goes to the late game. Right, it's just the nature of the map. If you play it correctly, you're always going to go to the late game. So you got to see another cool Murky pickup in the same matchup in the same map. There's some other situations, some other matchups where Murky's also good. I think we're doing Going Alone for Murky. For those of you who new to the stream, every Wednesday I do a show called Going Alone that focuses solely on the solo lane matchups. So far there's been Dahaka versus TLV. Spoiler, TLV wins. And Sonya versus Leoric on Braxis specifically. Spoiler, Sonya wins the lane, but Leoric wins the point. So when you're drafting it, you can sort of make that consideration if both play perfectly. And I was thinking about doing Murky versus Dahaka, but the replay unfortunately is not available yet. I might do it next week. But if there's any specific soul laning matchups you'd like to request, you can always do it on the Discord server. If there's any specific ones, especially if they were in an HGC, because it makes it really easy for me to find examples at that point. But yeah, all of these series were one-sided, basically, because the teams weren't even. Tempest is a significantly better team than Blossom. L5 is a significantly better team than everyone in the region except MV Black and maybe Tempest. Like, this was essentially if every single series in EU had been Dignitas versus B Genius, that's like what these series would have been. Why is it that Murky does so well against Dahaka? Can you elaborate? I actually talked about it a lot in my post-Clash stream. Because we were doing an analysis of the matchup specifically, but basically Murky's a pseudo-global, and in the very, very late game, Murky can always die for free to get push, and it's really hard to always be there to deal with him, whereas, because Dahaka wants to be elsewhere on the map. And so eventually Murky just wins the push race and starts to threaten keep directly. There was actually a moment where he was pushing all the way to keep, backed up, joined the team fight, died on purpose, captured the shrine, walked down and got the Dragon Knight in the Eastern Clash game. It's a little more complicated, and it only works on Dragonshire because Dragonshire is guaranteed to go to the late game. Like, it wouldn't work on Braxis, for instance. It wouldn't be the same dynamic. You need to have the soul lane go for a long period of time, and it needs to be like a bigger map as a result. And Dragonshire is really the only map where the soul lane matters the entire game that isn't an early game map. Like, you don't really have a soul lane on Garden of Terror. You don't really have a soul lane on Cursed Hollow. You can make an argument for Tomb, but Murky's too high risk on Tomb because if he dies, he loses the gems. So it really is just a Dragonshire strategy, specifically. If teams stay in HGC after elimination matches, how many players can they change? 1. You get 1 mid-season roster change. If you want to change more than that, I don't think they'll let you. They just, you can't do it. It's not that they kick you out, you just can't do it. So the best here you think can contest Sonya and Braxis is Leo? Sonya wins the lane. Leo wins the point. It's a really important distinction. If you have a 4-man that's guaranteed to win bottom point, right, and you put Leo in the top lane, Leo's going to win that point, so you're going to get a 100-0 Zerg wave. But let's say you have a team that's not guaranteed to win the point, and you need to have a solo laner who can make sure that Sonya doesn't take the point away from that solo laner, or you're going to lose both points, right? In that case, Leo's a good pick. But if you need to actually beat Sonya in lane, and you don't necessarily need to worry about the point, then that's a different consideration. Teams think about these things. All right, why did Playing Ducks give up both shrines in their game? It's a really specific question. See if we can do to answer that one. See if I can find the Playing Ducks Infernal Shrines. Make sure this is showing up on stream correctly. It is. We're good. God, that fort is just gone. This is so ridiculous. All right, so this is Playing Ducks. I think the shrine's gonna start spawning here in a minute. And it looks like they got... Who beats her in lane? Sonya can't... Sonya's really hard to beat as any melee hero in lane because her healing from Whirlwind is so high that if there's a wave there, you actually can't kill her. You need to be able to interrupt Whirlwind and need to be able to damage her so much that you can kill her between Whirlwinds. And there's actually no hero that does both of those things. There's no hero that can interrupt Whirlwind and put enough damage onto her to actually kill her. The best you can do is draft a ranged hero who can either out-siege her or can potentially kill her with a burst talent when you pick it up at 7. Falsehead can do that, but he has to dodge the spear. And he needs Boomerang, so you have to wait for 7. Butcher might be able to do it with his stacks finished. I actually haven't tested Butcher as a solo laner in a while. That has other issues, obviously, but that might work. Zag out sieges. So the nice thing about Zag is you can just throw Banelings at the buildings, and the buildings will start dying. So you can actually just win the solo lane of Zag by out sieging Sonya, but you can never take the point away from her. So on Braxis in particular, it's like you have to give up the point, but you're going to get buildings. Is that worth it? It can be, as long as your 4-man's strong enough to never give up their point. It's fine. I've heard people say Zul'jin does well against her. That's also true. You get your stacks pretty consistently, and again, you just have to dodge the spear. The problem with Butcher is Sonya can take block, right? And if Sonya takes block and then takes the cooldown reduction at 4 for Hurricane, and she just stands in the wave, even if you interrupt the first Whirlwind, the second one is going to be there. So, and Butcher's just not that good until his stacks are finished. So, if you have to win the entire lane early, it's rough. Sonya's really hard to counter right now. Sonya has so much sustain and so much wave clear. She's really... Rexxar, you have to interrupt Whirlwind. So you have to save stun for the Whirlwind. And if Sonya ever does spear Rexxar himself, that's damage that he's not going to recover from. And she does that enough, you're going to die. So I would put Rexxar at Sonya as a skill matchup. But the people who tend to play a lot of Rexxar have more hours practicing him than Sonya players have practicing Sonya. So when you see it in games, like in the wild, it tends to be that the Rexxar sort of wins because the Rexxar probably has 200 Rexxar games and the Sonya probably has like 25 Sonya games. Like that's not unusual at all. People who play Rexxar tend to play a lot of Rexxar. Right? So I would class that as a skill matchup. Either one can win. It just depends. Technically any solo lane is a skill matchup because I've seen people outplay in all situations. But one of the reasons that when I do my Going Alone show is I focus on pro replays is because they're about as close as optimal as you can get. And for instance, in the Sonya matchup, if Leoric missed one Drain Hope, he got forced off the point. Leoric could only stay on the point if he hit every single drain. He missed one, he had to leave. Right? And that's an outplay because you can dodge the Drain Hope by spinning through the Leoric with the Whirlwind. And the one he missed, she actually spun through and then immediately went back the other way. So he got juked. She juked the W of Leoric. Outplay is always possible, but I'm saying if both play perfectly, this is the way it should end up. And it's important to know that too. Like, what do I need to do to outplay? What do they need? What mistake can I make them make that I win the lane, even though this matchup's not favorable for me? That's the whole premise of the show. It's fun. I like it. To be fair, I've only beat Sonya's Butcher on point control maps. I can understand that. That would be fair. So again, I think Sonya would... It might even be the same dynamic. Sonya would win the lane but lose the point to a Butcher. And as it turns out, that depending on how strong your format is, that's not necessarily good enough. All right. Playing Ducks versus Team Dignitas, Infernal Shrines. Both teams have some siege potential. It's a little bit greater. Zarya is one of the best siege heroes in the entire game. A healed Greymane, if someone else is tanking the tower, can really burn down buildings extremely quickly. Both teams respected the... And really important dynamic. A lot of people make this mistake, and it frustrates me to no end. If you have a situation where a team just starts pushing at level 1, you can't rotate to beat them if you're not already in mid lane. Right? If you're not already in mid, you're going to be in a situation where you're going to rotate to them. They're going to back up. They're going to know you're rotating. They're going to be fine. They're going to have gotten free value, and they'll just be ahead for the rest of the game. Even if your siege isn't as good, the correct decision is to keep pushing. So as a result, the forts got traded. Here's where Playing Ducks got really unfortunate. If this had spawned bottom, they would have 100% wanted to contest this. But because it spawned top, they didn't necessarily want to do the rotation because they knew the 3-man was already here and all of the wave clear was here. All of the wave clear was here. Right? Because they knew it was there because they saw it with Sonya, they saw it on the fort. They knew best case scenario what was going to happen was they would get there and this would already be at 20, 23, 25, somewhere around there. Like right now is when they'd be getting there. You actually see Sonya coming down to start to scout to zone the rotation. You can see the scouting drone is already set up. Right? You can see Bakery is standing in the bush, making sure he's keeping vision. The only vision advantage they don't have is the minion wave's not there. And so instead, Playing Ducks like, okay, well, can we push for a keep? They grab the camp. They already have the damage to the wall. They're just pushing in here. And they're like, can we get a keep? If you can trade a keep for a Punisher that's going to go onto a keep, then that's relatively even, especially since early game the Punisher scaling isn't that great. There's no way that Punisher gets a keep. If they can trade for a keep, that's a good scenario. Immediately Mene backs. But this is a 4-man push, right? Versus now as a 4-man defense, but Mene had to back. That did slow down the Punisher considerably. And here's where Dignitas does something just really, really smart. And Bakery talks about how one of the reasons that Infernal Shrines is his favorite map is because he loves doing stuff like this. They wait. They stop at 39 out of 40. And there's two reasons for that. One, it gives them the ability to defend as 4 and then push. If they win this defense, then they can go push and pretty much make it more likely that they get a keep. Whereas if they just capped it now and pushed with just the Greymane, Sonya can jump it over the wall. They're not very likely to get very much value out of it. But the second thing is if Dignitas wins this defense and delays the Punisher until they're 7.25, 7.5, they'll actually have 10 during the next Punisher phase, and they'll have it first, assuming they win the defense. That's the critical part. So they're delaying that to bank on the win here, and it forces them to back up. And you can see they're still waiting. They're waiting. They're getting that experience. They pick up the Punisher, right like here. They get the camp. They're pushing in with it. This is going to happen, whatever. I don't think they're not going to get the keep here, but they do the pressure. And they hit 10. Any second now. They hit 10. Ducks is not 10. They have 10 during the second Punisher phase. Playing Ducks does not. Such good shot calling. I don't think you guys understand how hard it is to make that call and to have people actually listen to you. It's such a good call. They actually could have capped it a little bit earlier than they did, and it would have been even better, because if they'd capped it 10 seconds earlier, there's no way Playing Ducks could have even gotten close to 10. There's just no way. And because they're not 10, they're just going to push. Basically, a Punisher, you expect to get a wall on average. So if they push and get a wall, then it's worth giving up the Punisher as long as they don't fall too far behind. My problem with this, and it's a big one, is that Playing Ducks has an early game comp. Their comp is actually stronger in the early game. Team Dignitas' comp is stronger in the later game. So accelerating the game is actually bad for Playing Ducks. They should have contested that first shrine, even though it was unfavorable for them in terms of where it spawned. But yeah, Dignitas made that call because they knew on average how much experience they would get, so they did everything. That 6 to 10 for Dignitas was perfect. I literally don't think they could have done anything better. And it's one of Bakery's favorite maps. And it's why it's one of his favorite maps, because there's so much decision making that goes into it to plan for the next like 4 minutes. It's a really good question. Hopefully that was a sufficiently detailed answer. I forget actually who asked that. Let me scroll up real quick. Or if they want to shout out who did it, and they can tell me if that was a good enough answer. You think they should have fought 9v10? No, the first shrine. I think they should have fought. Here, this is the link to the match, guys. Thank you, man. I appreciate that. I don't have notifications up, do I? I don't. I do. I'm bad. I just haven't gotten any follows. Is my follower alert not working? I feel like I normally would have gotten follows during a show like this. Maybe not. But yeah, that's why Playing Ducks didn't contest the second shrine. I think they should have, and why they didn't contest the first shrine. I think they should have contested the first shrine, though. I think if you have an early game comp, you need to make sure you're contesting objectives in the early game. And their comp is super early game. Sonya's a really good, strong early game hero. Arthas is an early game hero. Zara is an early game hero. Vol and Ariel aren't. But... Any other questions? I think we did a pretty good summary. I don't have a great format for this show yet. I'm probably gonna change things a little bit as the weeks go on. I'll probably start out with one region and then move on. They've been silent? That's so weird. Is the Team Liquid one that confuses the most? Okay, we'll go over the Team Liquid one. So Team Liquid versus Playing Ducks Shrines. I saw the HGC pros take the level 1 W stack talent for us instead of Rhyme. That's not true. The W talent was taken in, I think, 3 out of 8 games or something. So not quite half. There's a pretty big debate, honestly, in the community about which of those talents is better. And I'm going to say if you need to win the solo lane, Rhyme is always better. If you need to be the tank for your team and be the initiator, Frost Presence is on average going to be better. If you plan to take Shattered Armor at 13 because your Focus Fire is really good, then Frost Presence is going to be really good. Right? Yeah. But on average, if you're drafting Arthas as a bruiser / solo laner, I think you should take Rhyme. And if he's the tank, you should take Frost Presence because you need that initiation to be made up for. But there's a huge debate right now in the pros. And some pros are taking one because they think it's better. Some pros are taking the other because they think it's better. Eventually, a consensus will be reached. But whenever there's a rework, it takes a long time. I think both talents are really strong. But Rhyme is just so good for Arthas' early game, and that's where he excels the most already. So by reinforcing that strength, I think it helps him a lot to get a tempo lead in the game. On the other hand, you can make the argument that his early game's already strong enough. Frost Presence makes his mid game really good. Right? So there's two very clear lines of argument here. It's just a question of which one you think is better. On early game maps, Rhyme obviously is always going to be really good. So the question was, why doesn't Playing Ducks go for the Shrine during the first Punisher? So first Punisher's up, Team Liquid grabs it. Playing Ducks does go for it. They're in the lane. They're right there. I was lied to. You told me he didn't go for the Shrine. They're right there. They're literally on top of it. You can see the minimap. Falstad even uses Fly to get there. And Uberak does eventually end up going down. I think your question is, why did they rotate to it so slowly? Right? Because it spawns and they're not there. and they don't respect the race. I think that the reason that the playing Ducks didn't go is because they thought they could get the wall. And if you get the entire wall, then it's basically an even trade. If you don't miss token other lanes and get the entire wall. The problem is the Team Liquid already, and they have the Dahaka mid, right? So they're doing good. The problem is that Team Liquid knows this is going on. They have the Rag, they have Medivh here. They can put a lot of pressure on this push. They do have the Anub'arak, which helps a lot, because if Anub'arak just spams his abilities, the Beetles will actually tank the tower shots. Anub'arak is the best sieging tank of any of the tanks. Zarya is the best sieging bruiser. Anub'arak's the best sieging tank. If you have them both on the same team, you should just go push 100% of the time. It's actually it's silly. It's silly how effective it is. Team Liquid just gets on top of the shrine first because they had almost a 2-1-2 going on here, which is a strategy that we see a lot more in the Chinese scene. And they're just trying to get this wall, and Darkmok and Hasuabs bully them away and don't let them get the wall. If they'd gotten the wall, this would have been a reasonable trade. Once they realize they can't get the wall, they start to leave. But then Splendor's here, and they die, because this is a 3v2. It's lots of damage. It's lots of CC. Sports Billy can get out of here. Chris doesn't. He does take Shed Exoskeleton, so he does have that movement speed for a second there, but he still dies anyway. And then the fight continues to stop. Do pros ever go Afterburner on 16 on Falstead? Yes. Almost every time they go Giant Killer. If you go Seasoned Marksman, Hammer Gains, Boomerang, Gust, Giant Killer, you will more likely than not go Afterburner at 16. I think it actually happened literally in this game. Giant Killer, Afterburner. It's right there. Afterburner is so Airy Gust at 16 is a really good talent if you took Flow Rider, because it's going to be up more often. But if you don't go Flow Rider, the value of Airy Gust goes way down, and Afterburner gives you such a reliable escape that it's just better in the majority of scenarios. So if you go Giant Killer because of Double Warrior, which if you see Double Warrior, you should frequently just do that. Or even two really high health targets. Like Tychus has the highest health of any ranged assassin, except for late game Nazebo because of stacking. You should go Giant Killer, and if you go Giant Killer, then more likely than not, you should go Afterburner as well. What do I think of Gul'dan level 1 and 4? I go Accurate Corruption, Improve Lifetime. Gul'dan's level 1 and 4, like his level 1 is, you're going either Q build or E build. Those are your options. Q build is better sustain damage. E build gives you a burst option. And E build is good if you're playing him like as a mage on the team, because it gives you the burst. Q build is better for sustain damage, and it's unusual. We're not used to it yet, having sustain damage come from abilities instead of from auto attacks. Normally when we talk about sustain damage, we're talking about auto attackers. But sustain damage from abilities is fine. As long as the damage is consistent, it doesn't matter. Koreans love Q build because it is a really good hope generator for Ariel. That's how it got started. And then Lockdown was like, what if it worked in other scenarios? And you just played it in every single game, and it turns out it's really, really, really good. The amount of sustain damage you do is insane. So if you're going to go Q build, go Q build. If you're going to go E build, go E build. Gul'dan only has 2 level 1 talents. There's the Q talent and the E talent. The other ones don't exist. For level 4, it's just a question of who your support is. So if you're on a map like Tomb of the Spider Queen, and you're going, and you're always going to be near a Minuwave, you can go Consume Soul if you don't have a bursty support or a sustained support. If you have a Malf, don't go Consume Soul, because Malf can just throw one heal on you and you're done. But if you have a Rhaegar who has a 9-second cooldown on Chain Heal, he doesn't want to heal your ass up. Go Consume Soul. Heal yourself. If you have a Lucio, it's kind of debatable, because Lucio can sustain you for forever, but his sustain isn't really, like, it's not high relative to the amount of damage you're doing to yourself. We've even seen 1 or 2 times pros go the Life Tap talent at level 4, because on Infernal Shrines in particular, right? Because you can drain the minions on Infernal Shrines and have 100% uptime on Drain Life if you need it. So all the talents at level 4 for Gul'dan are actually viable, and they're just situational based on your build, your map, and who your support is. It feels like most pros just started making Q build center now. I think Q build is better in a coordinated environment. I think E build gives you more individual playmaking potential. But in a coordinated environment, I really do think Q build is just better, because it allows Gul'dan to do the thing he's absolutely one of the best heroes in the game at, and someone else can do everything else. What do I think about Helston on 13? The advantage to Fell Armor at 13 is that because you have this increased range at level 1 from Pursuit of Flame, you're very likely to have Fell Armor up all the time, and you can stand pretty far back, so the only damage you're going to take is from poke. And Fell Armor negates poke, right? Because you're not going to take damage from auto attacks, you're going to take damage from abilities. Fell Armor negates most of the damage from abilities. Personally, when I play Gul'dan in like Hero League, I take Hellstone most of the time, because I don't expect my team to peel for me. So it gives me a burst save mechanic. But in a coordinated environment, Hellstone is only really good with E build. I think it's questionable with Q build. And I think it's even a little bit questionable with E build, because that talent tier is so strong. Would you not go hungry for power with a sustain healer? Oh, I'd still go hungry for power. If I'm going Q build, I'm going hungry for power 100% of the time. It's just the where my sustain is coming from on my level 4 that's going to change. If I was on a map where I didn't have a sustain healer and I was never near lane, I would not have drafted Gul'dan, right? Because then I can't save myself. I can't sustain myself. I just wouldn't do that. And I don't think we've seen a single pro do that. They always draft Gul'dan on wave clear-centric maps where you're in lane consistently. And then it's just a question of, did they have a sustain healer? If yes, then go improve life top. If no, then go consume soul. It's a pretty simple flowchart. I think I answered all the questions. What are your thoughts on Dread's theoretical Q build with Echoed Corruption over the bigger Hellfire at 1? I feel like that's an inboxer, or I feel like it's an outboxer trying to be an inboxer. I'm not sure if that analogy makes sense to everyone, but outboxers are basically counter specialists. They'll stay pretty far back and jab you and wear you down, and they just rely on the fact that they're more mobile. And inboxers are guys with really heavy punches that just want to get in there and wail on you. And I feel like Gul'dan's strengths for both of his builds rely on being an outboxer and having enough range to really poke at people. I feel like if you did a hybrid build like that, you would change Gul'dan into someone who had to be really close to have maximum impact, which I think would work if you had a really heavy frontline in front of you, like triple melee, all standing in front of you, 2 of whom are preferably tanks or warriors of some kind. I can think of situations where that would be a good build. I don't think it's ever going to be a standard build. I don't think there's a majority of drafts where it's just going to be like this. It's never going to be the standard build. There's situations where it might be good. The hero with the most build diversity I see is Greymane. I see different builds almost every team and region. Yeah, and it's actually going to increase with the current Beta 2.0 patch, where Greymane gets half of Inner Beast or half of Wolfheart baseline. Ignoring personal compatibility but considering playstyle make the best NA team possible. Go. I'm going to have to think about that one. That's not an easy question. Were you surprised to see teams still grabbing Tychus regularly this weekend? No. Tychus is insane. Tychus has always been insane. Tychus always will be insane. Percent damage is really good, and the more armor that gets added to the game, the better percent damage will become because it doesn't apply to armor. On Dragonshire, it's best to go for a 4-man rotation between mid and bot. Nah, that's not necessarily true. And then split into a 1-1-3 once Shrine spawn and look to have the mid laner clear fast and rotate for ganks, right? Dragonshire is a really complicated map. Dread literally wrote a guide on Dragonshire. It's still one of the best map guides I've ever read. And he didn't break it down into when to do what. He broke it down into level 1 to 4, level 4 to 7, level 7 to 10, level 10 to 13. And I could break that down further. I could break it down into, do you have a stealth? Do you have a global? Level 1 to 4, are you going to win the 3-man? Are you going to win the 4-man? Do you have a Zool? How good is your wave clear? Is your wave clear better or worse? What is your pick potential like? Are you winning the soul lane matchup? Do you have a ganker who can help your soul? Like, you can force the soul laner to play safely if they're not visible on the map. Does that mean that your soul? You can literally win the soul lane in an unfavorable matchup by having a ganker who just never shows on the minimap. If they just sit in a bush for the entire game and they're literally AFK, that forces the soul laner top to play safely, right? At a very high level, Dragonshire may be the most complicated map rotationally of any map in the entire map pool. Dragonshire is a very difficult map. A basic strategy is draft to tie or win the soul lane, have a global or a stealth who can deny the solo lane potentially and make it so it's really, really difficult. And then once the shrine spawns, always have one of the shrines. You don't need to hold both, you just need to win one, as long as you're always pushing a lane that the other team is not pushing, and you're finding some way to deny their rotations. That's like the basic way to play Dragonshire, and that shows itself in a lot of ways. It shows itself as a 1-1-3. It shows itself as a 2-1-2, which is something we see from the Chinese teams quite a bit. It shows itself as drafting a late game solo laner and then drafting an early game 4-man, and then your solo laner will eventually win the point top, like at level 7 to 13, and then you hold the bottom point from level 1 to 6. All of those are draft considerations. You need to figure that out in the draft, or you're not going to be able to win the map. We saw Tempo Storm versus Teammate, we saw this. We saw Tempo Storm draft a better solo lane. They drafted a better 3-man, and they just won the entire map. They were just like pushing everywhere all the time. But you can draft, normally teams draft to create an asymmetry where they're necessarily winning one area but not the other. If Sonya doesn't lose in the solo lane, then why don't we see more of her? She's gankable. She doesn't have an escape. The reason you don't see Sonya very often is A, she's a very early game hero, and so she doesn't necessarily translate well into the late game team fighting. And B, she's very gankable because she lacks an escape. So, and she doesn't have enough survivability to survive like 2 or 3 man gank attempts. She can just survive most 1v1s, especially if there's a minion wave there nearby to heal on. So if you draft Sonya as your solo laner and she dies, you've lost a significant amount of your map pressure because someone has to rotate up and make sure you don't miss the soak. This is why we see her on Braxis, because there's no rotations, and not on maps where there's rotations like Dragonshire, where someone can just rotate up and kill her. You should do a map breakdown video on the maps Dread Not Missed. I actually am working on a series of map guides for GFE. It's one of the things they asked me to do. So there will be a map-by-map guide on how to play each map correctly in the reasonably near future. The first one should come out next month, I think, and then eventually I will get to all of the maps. You're welcome, Mixer. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Other questions? This is kind of fun. I thought of Sonya more as a horseshoe hero with shield nerves of steel at 16-20. That's fair. I would say it's 20. Sonya really needs Ignore Pain. If there's insufficient stuns, I would actually go no escape the majority of the time at 16, personally. But Nerves of Steel is just a really good talent. So it's fair to call her a horseshoe hero, but 20 is just such a long time to wait if you can't win your lane. I think Sonya is a hero you draft when she's going to win a lane. If you can't win a lane with Sonya, or you're on Infernal Shrines. If you're on Infernal Shrines, or you can win alone. Patreon. My Patreon is actually set up. I just, like, officially, you could theoretically support me if you wanted to. But I haven't set up, like, backer goals or anything, so you can't get any of the rewards yet. Yeah. The guides will be goals on Patreon, so if a guide gets funded, that guide's guaranteed to get made. Do I expect to see more Stitches Duranda comps on Tomb in the next weeks? Probably only from the teams that are already doing it. It's actually harder than it looks. You really need an experienced Stitches player to make Stitches work, period. You need to have a really good game sense. You need to have a really strong awareness of what rotations are going to happen where to secure those hooks. Because it's not enough to secure 1 or 2 hooks in the late game and call it a day. Like, you need to hit the majority of your hooks. And I only count a hook as a success if someone dies. So when I say you need to hit the majority of your hooks, I mean you need to throw out like 80% of your hooks need to result in a kill, ideally. There was a game where Sign played Stitches on Tomb of the Spider Queen, and he had 28 out of 28 hooks. And when I say he had 28 out of 28 hooks, I mean he pressed Q 28 times, and 28 times someone died. Right? That's a little ridiculous, but you need to be able to hit a lot of your hooks. I don't know if teams are going to be willing to put in the time. Monk Insight build and thoughts on it? Insight build's really good if you can continually auto-attack something, but you basically don't have a support until Insight is finished. And finishing Insight is actually surprisingly difficult. Not having a support in the early game sucks. So, how does Fans Chromie play compare to other top Chromies, and do you think he could potentially become another top Chromie? Fans Chromie play compared to top Chromie players is really bad if you want to make that comparison. His prediction needs a little bit of work, and his positioning is like awkward. He doesn't use his time trap super effectively. If you want to compare him to like an average player, Fans Chromie is like god tier. If you want to compare Fans Chromie to like people who've been playing Chromie for months and have 500 or 600 games on her, he's just nowhere near as good. If you watch Chris play Chromie and then watch Fan play Chromie, you will notice a significant difference. But yeah, Fan could be the top player on any hero that he decided to main. Like, he's good enough to, in my opinion, Fan is good enough if he mains a hero to just be one of the top players in the world at that hero. But the number of games you have to put on a hero to be really good at them is high. Like, I would put 100 at the minimum, not like the max, just the minimum. And that's for average, like an average difficulty hero. I would put the number higher for Medivh. I'd put the number higher for Illusion Master Samuro. I'd put the number higher for Vikings. Maybe 200 or 300 games, that again minimum, to be like really good at that hero. And Fan, I think, doesn't have enough games. Just doesn't have enough games in Chromie. All right. Ignoring personality, top NA team. That's such a hard question because you really have to determine who the best tank is and who the best support is. June is the best support. Actually, it's not even. June is the best support in NA. So it'd be June. And then I ask myself the question, is Fury or Justine a better tank? Fury's the better tank. So it'd be June and Fury. I don't know who the other 3 players would be. Fan would almost certainly be one of them. Zuna, so that's 4. I could put Fan on melee flex. I could put Zuna on a range, which is where he belongs. Actually, I could put Zuna on melee flex and put Fan on range. That makes way more sense. So I'm missing a true flex / ranged. I don't know who my fifth person would be. I think Faye is the best Chromie NA personally. Superstars doesn't let her on it though. Faye certainly has the most games on NA of any NA Chromie player. I think Faye is a really good Chromie. Can we theorycraft Hanamura strategy right now? We did that yesterday, but Hanamura is a 2-lane map. Draft early game heroes, push, win. Because of the small number of healers, do you feel there's more hero-based skill in the healers, or is it just general? I think it's just... Oh, I see what you're saying. I think because there's a small number of healers tend to, or support players tend to be really good at their heroes, because if you have 3 heroes to practice and you have 300 games to practice in, you're going to get 100 games on each hero, right? You're going to be really good. If you have 8 heroes to practice and you have 300 games, you're not going to get 100 games on each hero. So for people who've been support mains for a long time and they had to practice Rhaegar and then they had to practice Uther and then they had to practice Mouth, like their hero pool was really small. They're really good at that small number of heroes because they have so many games on them. If you're a melee flex and you have to know how to play every single off tank and every single melee assassin, that's a lot more heroes to play. I would actually be curious in the future if we had like 6 or 7 man teams and they swapped who was playing based on the draft. I think that might be an interesting dynamic. I don't think we'll ever do that. I think it'll always be 5-man teams, and as a result, I think our supports and our tanks are always going to look like the highest mechanical skill players because they have the most time on their team and their role. Which is yet another reason that that's another reason that teams should have a main tank player, and one of the reasons that GFE really suffered for not having one, but they fixed that. Delaying opponents' payload is very valuable on Hanamura if you're sieging or pushing your payload at the same time. That's true. If you have some way of delaying the payload, it's awesome. Stealth heroes can delay it just by sitting there, and if you don't have a reveal or can't see them. If you only have time on one number, I would get the healing camp. I think the healing camp is the most valuable. It gives a lot of XP. It gives you the healing, which is obviously quite valuable, and it's just one dude. Although the turret one is really good because you can mount the turret on the payload, and I found that to be surprisingly effective. Also, the turret helps you push because it absorbs tower shots. I was playing a game yesterday, and we just dropped a turret in front of a fort, and we managed to kill the fort because it was killing the turret. Healing is hard. Healing is difficult. Healing in Heroes of the Storm is really easy when you know what your team's doing, and really impossible if you can't understand. So you'll heal someone and they'll dive in, and you're like, Or you won't heal someone because they already backed out of the fight, and then they'll see an opportunity and they'll go back in and they'll die, and they're like, why didn't you heal me? I was like, well, you backed out. You were out of the fight. I was healing the guy who was still in the fight. If you just left, we would have won that fight. Instead, you died. Now it's a 4v1, or now it was a 4 for 1 instead of a 4 for none because you had to die back in and do absolutely nothing. Funnily enough, I like playing almost all supports in Heroes of the Storm, despite healing just being so difficult and feeling so frustrating when you can't communicate with your team. I actually like playing Morales. I think it's fun. I actually like playing Lilial. I don't play her as a healer. I actually like playing Ariel. Ariel's one of my favorite heroes to play, but I need to trust my battery, and I don't. Is Muradin still the best tank now, or is it Arthas? I don't think there's a best anything right now. I think most heroes in this game are pretty viable, and it just comes down to how good you are at drafting. If you want to play a hero, you can absolutely make that hero viable in a draft just by understanding every strength and weakness they have and drafting accordingly. Muradin is by far the best generic tank and always will be. I don't think there's going to be ever a meta where Muradin is not by far the best generic tank and everyone else is situational by comparison. I think 4 payloads up at once is too chaotic and never know what to do. I mean, managing chaos is the hallmark of high-level strategic play. I saw some Ariel Lucio Vala in HCC. How good is it? It's very good. It's extremely good. It's insane. You want to keep the Vala alive no matter what if you're going Vala, Lucio, Ariel. So you can put yourself in a situation where you want to draft like heavy frontliners and peel. So Johanna Arthas would be really good. Tyrael Arthas would be really good. Johanna Rag would be okay. I wouldn't be like super, super excited about that. Yeah, just another frontline. You could draft Zarya if you wanted to. If someone let you have Zarya and double support and a tank, and then it'd be very silly. Someone I'm healing is diving way too hard, and many times I'll stop healing them, force them to play more conservative, and resume the healing. That's fair. My frustration with Uther and HL, people asking for heals without realizing how long his cooldowns are. That's going to happen again. Although I think Uther's actually going to be like one of the best secondary supports from playing with him on 2.0. I think Uther is going to be the best second support in the game. Do you feel that the current meta, we have a large number of late game enablers and late game heroes, is going to be here to stay for a longer time? Yes. At least on all 3-lane maps. On all 3-lane maps, that is going to continue to be the case. On 2-lane maps, we're going to continue to see the early game, mid-game comps to win, to tempo out the game. Zarya, Vala, Ariel, Lucio, Arthas, Muradin. Yeah, there you go. That's fine. I'm ahead of the curve here. Baker tweeted he thinks Uther is more viable as a second support. Do you think he can fit the bruiser slot? Yes. I actually think Uther may be able to fit the bruiser slot in a double support comp. And then you would have 2 backliners, 2 supports, and a tank. I think that'd be fine. I think picking Uther into Malf and Johanna are going to be brilliant. You intentionally walk into Condemn and Brutes to proc the CD on your queue. That's going to be funny, actually. I hadn't thought about that. That's true. Best type of comp to counter that type of Zul, Zebo, Ragnar comp in those 3-lane maps? That's actually an interesting question. What do I think is the best type of comp to counter essentially late game macro comps? The best way to counter Zul is just to kill him. Like, the best way to counter Zul is just to kill him. It sounds so dumb when you put it like that. But if you keep killing Zul, then his early game lane pressure doesn't matter. And every time he pushes out a wave, he has to accept the reality that he could die for it. So Kerrigan, stun comps in general. Like, if you have a Kerrigan, Kael'thas, EDC, or Muradin, either one, and you can just keep killing Zul and make it hard for Nazeebo to sack, and then make sure you draft a person who can beat Rag in the solo lane, you can get to 10 first and just tempo out the game. If you get to 10 first, you want to get to 13 first, 16 first, end the game. That's it. That's the best way to do it. Whether or not you can do that mechanically, whether or not you can do those rotations and secure those kills, that's an execution problem. But that's the best way to do it, in my opinion. What healer do I think will pair best with Uther? Lucio. Uther has really high burst, but no sustained healing. Lucio has really high sustained healing and no burst. Also, Uther's major weakness is movement. Lucio always has movement speed. It's a match made in heaven. What needs to change in the game for solo tank and one support to become meta? Damage needs to go down. Currently, damage is so high that if you go triple ranged, your backline just gets deleted by a flank. This was not true pre-scaling changes. Post-scaling changes, when this started to become the meta, you would have flanking Janas, and they would be fine because you couldn't just kill the Jaina for being like 2 steps out of position. If you want to have triple backline become the meta again, then you need to be in a situation where the triple backline can survive. And currently, damage is too high for that to happen. It's not even like they can't be healed. They're just dead. They're gonna just get blown up. You need to be in a situation where your ranged heroes can live. Valla needs to be as survivable relative to incoming damage as like a Thrall is. And then you can have triple backline again. That will never happen, by the way. Blizzard is not going to rebalance the game numbers like that ever again. Probably Luciar Ariel since... Yeah. Ariel would be okay. I don't like Ariel as much because doesn't fix the movement speed issue and because you don't have the same burst. Or they don't have the same sustain, I should say. Although, if someone dives deep to give Ariel hope and then they get focused and then you heal them and they get armor, that's okay. I think double backline, double support is always going to be a viable composition. And I think triple frontline or duo frontline is always going to be really good. But I don't think you're ever going to see the return of tank healer triple backline. The one time, I think we've seen it twice in pro play in the last year, and it lost both times in extremely one-sided games. And the team's relatively even, so it was the comp that was the problem. It's just not a good comp. You can't control vision. Why is it that most people thought of Tychus as dead, but he's still viable in the pro scene? The range reduction really made it possible for tanks to get on top of him, and he counters tanks. So the fact that tanks can now outplay the Tychus and deal with him kind of sucked for him. But he's still viable in the pro scene because armor is everywhere, and Tychus has the best percent-based damage ability in the game. And percent-based damage ignores armor. It's really that simple. It's really that simple. Now with Cassia buffs and enough time being out, where do you think she fits in her role? I don't know where Cassia fits. I haven't played her enough, and I haven't seen enough other people play her to be certain where she is. I feel like with the lack of wave clear and the lack of siege, she's going to be a mid to late game hero. I don't think she's an early game hero. I don't know where her spike is. I do think that her wave clear is now better with the Fen changes, so that's consideration in 2.0. I'll evaluate that. Her role is kind of weird. She has poke. She's like poke into finish, right? So she's kind of a skirmishing hero. And I don't really think we've had a skirmishing hero yet. I don't think we've had a hero who's reasonably high poke, but then has a really good finisher. The nearest equivalent is old Greymane with old Incendiary Elixir. And Greymane was almost OP, but his range is longer, right? Cassie's range is really, really short, which means she's, again, in that threat range of the entire front line when she's doing this poking shenanigans. So, I don't know. I don't want to commit to saying that Cassia is going to fit well into certain metas. I don't know if Cassia could be the solo ranged in a comp. If you went triple frontline Cassia, would that work? I don't know the answer. I do think she's a really good hero. I think having a mid-range hero that is kind of mid-range plus melee is kind of interesting. But I feel like she's very punishable and therefore has a very high skill cap. And I don't think anyone's played enough games on her to hit that skill cap, so I don't know where she's going to end up. I often see Nubrak picked early in the draft late, and I can't tell if ability damage is more common than I thought it was, or is it just expanding? A Nubrak is really common because ability damage is really common. If it comes from a button, it's usually ability damage. There's exceptions like Arthanis' Twin Strikes, Thrall's E, Wind Fury, but if it comes from a button, it's ability damage. Valla does sometimes 50%, depending on build, more than 50% of her damage from abilities, not from auto attacks. So if it's ability damage, it's bad against him. Like the best counters to a Nubrak in that sense are like Tychus, Zul'jin, and Raynor. And we've only seen Zul'jin and Tychus in the meta. We haven't seen any Raynor. Even Falstad, all of his burst is ability based. So And he's one of only 3 heroes that has he's one of only 3 tanks that actually has everything in his kit that a tank needs. He has the mobility. He has the ability to sponge a significant amount of damage. He has peel, especially with the changes to his E and the fact that Bed of Barbs is now a level 4 talent. You have that slow built in to his kit, and you get an additional slow. And you have initiation. Oh, Anubarak's kit has always been good. Anubarak's kit has always been one of the best tanking kits. The problem was he was too fragile to be a tank, and now they've changed that over time, right? So now he can actually tank in the majority of scenarios. So he's one of the top 3 tanks. Like prior to the EDC nerfs, I would say he's one of the top 3 tanks in the game. After the EDC nerfs, I would say he's one of the top 2 tanks in the game. I would say Muradin and Anubarak are like the 2 best tanks on average in the game. Can I show us what build I would go on New Uther? I can't show it to you. Maybe I could show it to you. Let me check real quick. See if I can find a calculator that has the new... Is Heroes Hearth calculator has it. Actually, I haven't answered this question that involves... testing something that I haven't tested yet. I don't know if anyone actually has the answer. Does the level 7 talent or level 13 talent cause the armor to proc? Because if it causes the armor to proc, then it's by far the best talent at that tier. Oh, this is current build. PTR. There we go. So this is my build. W. Holy Fire. This talent's actually insane. It just does so much damage. Holy Shock could be really good, as could Pursuit of Justice, but I actually think this is going to end up being the best talent. All of these are good. I think Guardian of Ancient Kings is probably the best one. You can make an argument for Armor of Faith, but I don't like it as much. Either the Heroics. If you're going to play the Bruiser role, I would say Divine Storm's a little bit better. And then if Blessed Champion procs the armor, this is just silly, because it means for the next 5 seconds after using Holy Light, Uther's basic attacks heal him and nearby allies for 15% of the total amount healed. If that heal counts, that gives you basically 7 seconds of uptime on armor. 8, potentially. Right? 8 seconds of uptime on your armor, if you can just be auto-attacking something, is nuts. That's so high. In the situation where like Armor of Faith was getting full value, your uptime would be 100% as long as you were auto-attacking things. So it's an interaction I meant to test yesterday and didn't. Right? So if that's how that works, that's insane. All of these seem really good. Benediction is just like such a standard talent to go to. But if you're running double support, which I think you should be, then Tyr's Deliverance is going to be by far the best talent. And then any of the 20s are good. Although Divine Protection would obviously just be nuts if Blessed Champion works. Because it would mean that you have 2 stacks of armor basically all the time. So that's just an interaction that needs to be checked. If someone wants to check that and get back to me, be perfectly happy. Thoughts on Zagara? We talked about Zagara a lot earlier. I'm pretty sure Blessed Champion doesn't proc the armor. It shouldn't, because it would be overpowered, but it should based on the wording of the abilities. So... yeah. Well, that was fun. I hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I did. That was the first HGC recap show. It actually ended up running for 2 hours, which is longer than I expected it to. But turns out people had a lot of questions, and I'm happy I was able to answer them. If there's any other last-minute things that are kind of short, I'd be happy to answer them. Tomorrow there will be the Going Alone show. Do ability damage buffs stack? Yes. Yes, they do. Not very frequently you get to actually have that, but they do in fact stack. Double check ETC nerf in EU HCC. He's OP. You can't argue that ETC is not worse, right? Because ETC got essentially with perfect armor usage, his 8% more survivable than he was, but he's losing 25% auto attack speed for him and his whole team. Like, you can't argue that he's not worse. The question is, how much worse is he? His Hero League win rate is a lot worse. But his high-end pick potential, his, like, if you coordinate and you're the initiator and you get a pick on someone, it's basically the same. You're slightly worse because you lost some damage from Echo Petal. But biggest winner and loser of PTR patch? I think Ariel and Uther are the biggest winners. I don't know who the biggest loser is. Although, actually, if Uther comes back into the meta, then anyone who gets punished by stuns is going to be the biggest loser. So Illidan and Sonya are going to lose. I thought that HGC wasn't on the patch with the nerf ETC yet. Oh, that's actually true. We're not even on the nerf ETC yet, are we? I don't think we are. China is. Because China can't play on the tournament server. They have to play on the live server. But everyone else is on the Proteus patch. Well, we'll take for ETC to be the king again. The buffs on 2.0 are a good start. He has a health buff. He has some other minor tweaks. Those are a good start. Was an ETC nerfed in the Proteus patch? We can actually check this. We can just go to Heroes patch notes. Assuming the site loads. I don't think ETC was nerfed in that patch. I'm like 90% sure. New hero Proteus. Yeah, ETC was not changed in the Proteus patch. It'd be right here if he was. So they're still playing on the pre-nerf ETC. Blizz was linking the patch notes they were playing on during the weekend, and that wasn't the patch they were playing on. It said Proteus patch at the top of the screen. Were they playing on a different patch than the one that the screen said? Obviously, we can't see that, right, as viewers, so we can't know unless they're a hero who was specifically changed in one patch but not the other was being played. And I don't think that we saw any of them. There was no like updated talent art or anything. We couldn't tell. Poor Chen, such a great hero, but with hypermobility and stuns, Gloria's no chances to be meta. I don't think he's even stat-wise is weak. I would buff Chen's damage. I think Chen would be fine with a damage buff. Yeah, he was nerfed in Cassius patch. See, it's this batch here. And then ETC. This is the ETC nerf. They're not like huge. They seem really small. They're actually much more significant. I underestimated these a little bit at first, but you know, once you realize that he's at best 8% more survivable, on average he's actually worse, and he's losing a significant portion of his damage plus his team's damage, it just was pretty obvious. I don't see any situation in which Chen is better than Sonya. Chen dominates the solo lane versus Thrall, and Sonya doesn't necessarily win it. That's a pretty small example. Chen's better against Medic because of Barrel. Did you notice healing camps only cost 1 stack of bribe? So if you have a bribe on Hanamura, you can get the healing camp for just 1 stack of bribe, which makes it make bribe really, really good on that map, considering how much value you get from the experience. You can actually have Hanamura may be a map for the first time where you have a dedicated jungler just for the experience. And if bribe, there's enough people with good bribe talents that you could just take one of them for bribe and then not need a dedicated jungler, which means you can always have a person in lane and just rotate that person to get the camps really quickly when needed, especially the healing camps. What patch included the Probius Plus? I think it was this. I think it was the Cassia patch. It was not. Oh no, it wasn't Probius. I think Probius's buffs were a balance update, so it was like a mid patch. You can check Probius. Yeah, it was the balance update patch. So they were playing on the Probius balance update patch, but this did not have the ETC change. Man, if I could get consistent lighting on that green screen, I could totally have it. Need to buy soft lights for in front of me so I can get consistent lighting all the way across. I played with a Murky yesterday on Hannah, and he said it was his favorite map to play as Murky. I think it's going to be an okay Murky map, but it's such a late game map. If you know how to punish Murky in the early game, because he is punishable in the early game, he's going to have problems. If you just aren't good at playing against Murky, though, Murky will dominate that map. You're going to get so much push, so much experience. Is Probius overpowered? I think Pylon Overcharge is overpowered. I'm not sure if Probius is overpowered, but on the other hand, Probius's Wave Clear is God tier, and Wave Clear is inherently overpowered because of the way it enables rotations. I think Probius may be the most overpowered Wave Clear hero since initial release Zool. And Zool quietly had a 60% win rate for a little while. Probius may get to that level. He may. I think if Nullgate were buffed and Pylon Overcharge were nerfed and the rest of his kit were left the way it is, he would be okay. I think. There's a lot of other factors there, including which heroes are meta. Because he does suffer from gap closers and stuns and damage over time because of how it affects Workers' Rush and his ability to get out of sticky situations. All right, well, that'll be it for the post-HCC recap and analysis. Thank you guys for watching. Next week on Tuesday, same thing. This will be going up on GFE's YouTube channel tomorrow. So if you missed anything or have anything, or you want to show your friends, you can link them to that. And next week we'll have the same thing. We'll have another recap of China. We'll have another recap of Korea, another recap of EU, another recap of NA. And there will be another Reddit thread. The Reddit thread will be posted every single Sunday. So if you have questions when you're watching HGC, write them down, post them on the Reddit thread, and I will give you as detailed an answer as you like. Especially if I have the question in advance, it's really easy for me. Sometimes I have to go, ask people or ask teams why they did a certain thing or picked a certain thing. If you don't answer the question in advance, I can't do that. But I do have lines to most of the professional teams. I can ping them for questions if there's something specific that I don't know the answer to. But thank you all for watching. This is a stream where we never lose. We always win, or we learn something. Learning is always a win. I'll see you all later. Have a good night, everyone. Or day, I guess, since you can clearly see the sun behind me.